Hello students, today we are studying introduction of the cell and the cell theory. Very first, we must know that we are going to study today the cell. So we must know about that what are these two terms. One is the term known as the cytology and the another term is usually used is cell biology. We must know that what is the chief difference between the cytology and the cell biology. This is a new term. Cell biology is a new term, while earlier we were using the word cytology. What does this mean? Cytology suggests and says. Cyto word is actually coming from the word kaitos. Kaitos means cell and logos means study. Altogether we can say that cytology is the branch which deals with the study of the cell. Means we can also say that it is the study of cell structure. But in the more broader aspect, we nowadays use cell biology instead of the cytology. In cell biology, we study the cell structure as well as the function. Not only this, in cell biology, we include the study of physiology, biochemistry and genetics. So these are the difference between the cytology and the cell biology. In cytology, we are studying only the cell structure. In cell biology, we are studying the study of the cell structure and the function, as well as we are also including the study of the physiology, biochemistry and the genetics. Now, you can see here that all living organisms are composed of repeated structural units called as cells. Again I am repeating, all living organisms are composed of certain repeated structural units, and these repeated structural units are called as cells. Means all the organism body is composed of the cells. Now this cell word is coming from a Latin word known as the cella. Cella means hollow cavity. Means cells are just like hollow compartments. They can be called as hollow cavities, hollow compartments, hollow utensils, etc. So all living organisms are composed of the cells. Now we will be talking about the discovery. In the year 1665, there was a scientist known as the Robert Hooke, who discovered certain hollow cavities from a thin slice of cork under his light microscope, and these hollow cavities were called as cells by Robert Hooke. Then the credit goes for the discovery of the cell to the Robert Hooke. Again we are repeating, in the year 1665 there was a scientist whose name was the Robert Hooke, who discovered the hollow cavities in a thin slice of the cork under his light microscope, and he gave the term cell to these hollow cavities. But actually Robert Hooke has not discovered the complete cell. Actually these so-called cells seen in the thin slice of the cork were actually the cell walls. Robert Hooke has not seen the complete internal organization of the cell. He has only seen the cell walls in the thin slice of the cork. And whatever he has seen in the thin slice of the cork under his light microscope, he published his findings. He published the pictures of his findings in a book called as Micrographia. I am repeating, all the findings of the Robert Hooke he discovered in a book known as the Micrographia. But there was a scientist known as Antony von Leeuwenhoek who was the first person to see a living cell. Actual living cell, actual free cell was first of all discovered by a scientist known as the Leeuwenhoek. He observed many cells under the improved microscope developed by him. He has observed the cells of bacteria, yeast, protozoa, RBC, etc. in his microscope. Then the actual credit for discovering the living cell, or the credit goes for the discovery to view the internal organization of the cell, goes to Antony von Leeuwenhoek. So this was the discovery section, that who discovered the cell. Now when somebody asks you that what is a cell, we must know that cell is a structural and functional unit of an organism. All organisms, whether they are plants, animals, whatsoever, all living organisms are composed of cells, and cell is the structural and the functional unit of an organism. Means what? The body of each and every living organism is composed of the cells. We can also say that cells are the building blocks of organisms. All organisms are able to interact, all organisms are able to function just because of the presence of the cell. So we can say that cell is the structural and the functional unit of an organism. Not only this, all the things related to the heredity, means the chromosomes, the DNA, etc., the genes, all are present in the nucleus, and the nucleus is present in the cell. So we can altogether also call it as cell is the structural, functional and genetic unit of life. I am repeating once again, cell is structural, functional and genetic unit of an organism, and they are the building blocks, and that's why they are called as the building blocks of an organism. So this part was about the introduction. This was the introduction of the cell, that who discovered cell and what are cells basically. Okay, now to understand the cell in a more proper way, we have to study the cell theory, which is a very important part of the cell biology, that we must know about the cell theory. Now there were two scientists who proposed the cell theory. We are going to study cell theory. First of all, there was a scientist whose name was Deuterochet. Who laid foundation of cell theory. Once again I am repeating, the foundation of the cell theory first of all was laid by a scientist known as the Deuterochet. He boiled mimosa. Mimosa is a plant, in nitric acid and separated the cells. What he did? He boiled mimosa in nitric acid and separated the cell. So the foundation of the cell theory was first of all laid by a scientist known as Deuterochet. But he has not given the cell theory. The credit for the discovery of the cell theory goes to two scientists. One was known as Schleiden and another was known as Schwann. Again I am repeating, the credit for the discovery of the cell theory goes to two scientists known as the Schleiden and the Schwann. He was a botanist and he was the geologist. And the theory, cell theory given by the Schleiden and the Schwann is applicable on plants and animals. Both the theory given by the Schleiden and the Schwann, known as the cell theory, is applicable on plants as well as animals. Means the cell theory is not different for the plant cell and the animal cell. The cell theory is common for both the living organism known as the plants and the animal cell. Now, what were the main components of the cell theory? You see here. The main components of cell theory. Number one, all living organisms are composed of cells. Again, all living organisms are composed of cells. All living organisms are composed of cells. Second, cells are structural, functional, and genetic unit of life. All living organisms are composed of cells. Cells are structural, functional, and genetic unit of life. Third point, all cells arise from pre-existing cell. Means what? A new cell, I want to say a new cell arise from pre-existing cell. A new cell arise from pre-existing cell. In Greek it is also called as omnis cellula, cellula. Means what? A new cell arise from pre-existing cell. And this statement was added by Rudolf Virchow later on. This statement was earlier not included in the cell theory, but what today we study, the cell theory, we have included this point also. But this point was not given by the Schleiden and the Schwann. This point was added by the Rudolf Virchow, that always a new cell arises from the pre-existing cell. So this was the third point. Fourth point, all cells are similar in chemical composition and metabolism. All cells are similar in chemical composition and metabolism. The different organisms are not having different type of cells. The cells are generally alike, whether they are present in plant or they are animal, or they are present in animal. All cells are similar in the chemical composition and the metabolism. And the fifth one, all organism function because of activities and interaction of the cells. All organisms function because of activities and interaction of the cells. So these were the 5 major points of the cell theory which was given by the Schleiden and the Schwann. Only one point was added later on by Rudolf Virchow, which was the point number 3, that a new cell arises from pre-existing cell. Again, I am repeating the main points or the main components of the cell theory, that all living organisms are composed of cells. Cells are structural, functional and genetic unit of life. Third point, a new cell arises from pre-existing cell, which in Greek is also called as omnicellula. Acellula means each new cell arises from pre-existing cell. This point was not given by the Schleiden and the Schwann. This point was later on added by a scientist known as the Rudolf Virchow. All cells are similar in chemical composition and metabolism, and all organisms function because of the activities and the interaction of the cells. And this cell theory is applicable on all organisms. But there are certain exceptions. There are certain exceptions where the cell theory is not applicable. Just now I have said that cell theory is applicable on all plants, animals and all living organisms. But there are certain exceptions where the cell theory is not applicable. This is the exception to cell theory. And the biggest exception to the cell theory is the viruses. On the viruses, cell theory is not applicable. Now the question arises that why cell theory is not applicable on the viruses. So we must know that viruses are obligate parasites. Viruses are obligate parasites. What is the meaning of this word obligate? Means they can live only as parasites. They are not having any other option for life. When they are living as parasite, they are live. But outside the body, they are not having any existence. Means we can say viruses are obligate parasites. Inside body, they are live. Outside body, they are dead. Means what? They are not having any other option for life. Inside body, when they are present inside the body, when they are present as parasites, they are living. Outside the body, they are not having any existence. They are living as non-living identities. Viruses are obligate parasites. Second one, we can also say that viruses are subcellular in nature. They are not fully cellular. Inside the body, they are living. Outside the body, they are dead. Viruses are subcellular in nature. That's why on them the cell theory is not applicable. The biggest exception to the cell theory, that is on them cell theory is not applicable. The biggest exception to the cell theory are the viruses. They are the connecting link between the living and the non-living creatures. So these are the exceptions to the cell theory. So dear students, today we have studied the introduction of the cell and the cell theory. We have talked about the cytology, we have talked about the cell biology, we have talked about the discovery of the cell, that who discovered the cell. The cell was first discovered by the Robert Hooke in a thin slice of the cork, but the actual cell was discovered by the Leeuwenhoek. We have also discussed that cell are the basic units. They are the structural, functional and the genetic unit of the life. All the ingredients are present in the cell which are actually important for the living of an organism. All living organisms are composed of cells. We have discussed the cell theory also, right? We have discussed the major components of the cell theory. This topic is very important for right from the 9th class up to the higher classes, as well as for the medical entrance also. Thanks a lot. We will be coming back with few more topics. Thank you.